Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Richmond for the PCSA meeting in public with the Garda Commissioner. Just a few safety announcements before we start the meeting. Take notes of the emergency exits on either side of the room, and if you require any assistance, there's members of the PCSA staff here in the room. And as everyone will be aware, the event is streamed live, so just have your phones switched off or on silent, and again, anybody in the room can be part of the record of the meeting. Silence at all times for anybody who's not participating. And again, as usual, the engagement is between the authority and the Garda Commissioner and his colleagues. So everyone else is just present to observe. So if you can just maintain that silence. And again, if you do need to leave the room in the meeting, just do so quietly, not to disturb the meeting. Thank you very much, Elaine.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this public meeting of the authority. We wish to acknowledge the appointment of the new Commissioner, Justin Kelly, following a very highly competitive process, and we look forward to working with him when he takes up office on the 1st of September, and note that we will have an engagement with the new Commissioner in our public meeting in September. We also wish to note that it is the Commissioner's last public meeting, and I understand that he has engaged in over 200 meetings in public at this stage, north and south, on policing. So I'm sure as today, as he's blessed among women, that he is looking forward to a period of not addressing questions in public on policing for the foreseeable future. I'd like to note, Commissioner, the monthly report and the additional information that you've put in, and the authority is very grateful that we have additional information in the monthly report, and hope that that is what we will have going forward. I'd also like to extend our appreciation for the Memorandum of Understanding that has been signed on inspections between Garda Síochána and the authority, and the very hard work that was undertaken on both sides to get that Memorandum of Understanding on inspections to be signed. And we will have a discussion on another occasion on the inspection plan that the authority has as part of its new powers under the new Act. I would like to take and wish our best regards, Commissioner, to the member who was injured on Capel Street this week, and we extend our best wishes for a member who was attacked in the line of duty, and if you could provide, if possible, any update on his well-being, and indeed those members who witnessed that awful attack.
Thank you very much for your opening comments, and indeed this is my last public meeting, and I know you've afforded the opportunity to me for a few comments at the end of the meeting. In respect of the two members involved in the incident on Tuesday evening, actually both were injured. One was received injuries, stab-type wounds to the right arm, and the other was punched in the face. But both members are doing well. I spoke to them this morning. Full welfare supports are available to them, and obviously the whole organisation extends its good wishes to them for a speedy recovery. They're both in good heart, I have to say. They both did exceptionally well on the night, and after being attacked very, very instantaneously, responded and then made an arrest and brought a very dangerous situation to a safe conclusion, really within the space of seconds. And then very quickly then other Gardaí were on the scene, again really within a minute, 30 seconds even, other Gardaí had responded as well to back them up. So a very nasty incident, but one which was brought to a satisfactory conclusion by the actions of the members that night.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank the GardaSAFE leadership team in their engagement with the authority in terms of the consultation process on policing priorities, and appreciate the time given by Garda personnel to facilitate that consultation, and Martina will now shortly discuss policing priorities and where we are with those. So I just note for the public there are 6 items on the agenda today, and the final item will be, as the Commissioner has alluded to, a period where he will give reflections on the future of policing and the challenges of policing therein. So if Martina Maloney is going to now take the item on policing priorities.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. As the Chair says, I'm handling some of the issues in relation to the policing priorities at the moment. So thank you very much for the comments that you've returned to us. As you know, for some time the PCSA has been working on the public consultation and consultation with other organisations to develop the priorities. So on the draft priorities we sent you, we acknowledge that you are satisfied that they broadly align with the strategic objectives that you've identified working towards the development of your own strategy. And we note a number of other comments that you've made also in your return, which we'll be reviewing now and before we finalise the final priorities. But it's very much appreciated, the positive feedback you've given us in relation to that. Obviously, the priorities we've identified have been very much informed by the extensive public consultation that we engage in and also the consultation we engaged in, which included a number of members of Garda Síochána. So a number of key issues have emerged from that consultation, and I might touch on just a few of them today. Really, I suppose there was a very strong sense from those who participated in our questionnaire about the importance of the availability and visibility of Gardaí in the community, and they see that as vital importance to the community, and also the responsiveness to calls for service in the community. And a second really strong message that came through from the consultation was the importance of the presence of Garda Síochána to prevent wrongdoing and harm. So this related very much to community policing, but also to the regular Gardaí, as they are referred to in Garda Síochána. And the Gardaí themselves also echoed these views in the responses to the consultation. So at this stage, I'd like maybe to give you the opportunity to share your views in relation to the balance in terms of resourcing within the allocations to the different services. And in particular, has the specialisation of policing come somewhat at a cost in relation to the policing in communities? Are you satisfied with the current balance of resources between regular policing and the specialist units? And how is the distribution of those resources? What criteria are used for them? How is it decided? And are they consistently applied? Are those criteria followed around the country?
Okay, thank you very much. And this is obviously a topic that we wrestle with at the moment, but will continue to be a feature going forward as well. I'll turn very shortly to the Deputy Commissioner. But what I would say, and is very evident, is just the scope of the policing work that we're expected to undertake and the changing nature of that police work as well. So if one looks to the rise in incidents around cybercrime, one looks to the incidents and the rise of incidents around domestic abuse, serious sexual assault, and also then requirements around the armed support unit and things like roads policing, etc. There's lots of areas which actually do require a highly trained and skilled response. And to expect every Garda member, and Garda members are a very flexible resource, and they respond to a wide range of incidents, and they're trained and equipped for that. But at the same time, just given the level of expertise to provide, in effect, a world-class, top-class service to victims of crime, it does require increasingly a degree of specialisation, particularly around very serious crime. So that is how policing has changed, particularly I would say over the last 20 to 25 years. And certainly when people look back, and often figures are quoted to me around deployments from 20 years ago, at the same time I have to take into account all the new responsibilities and the requirements then of those new demands to match those with an appropriate resource. But we are very mindful of the impact of visibility, the difference that makes. We've seen that illustrated in Dublin. And perhaps maybe if I turn to the Deputy, you can set out just what we've been doing in respect of other regions to reinforce that message around visibility.
Thank you. So I think the challenge is twofold right now. We have two things that are necessary at the same time, and certainly this even goes back to a month ago when we were last together talking about, community policing as an example. So our numbers overall are lower than we wanted them to be with respect to, and I'm talking about, in terms of our members specifically. When you look at how we've dealt with deployment historically, we're putting more rigor into what that analysis looks like. That's a combination of demand, in other words, how many calls for service do we get? What does that look like? As well as population growth. I know people would argue that we should do more of one and less of the other, et cetera, and it's certainly something that we're constantly revising. The challenge is, as the Commissioner said, that the specialization functions, actually, if you look at things like economic crime, it's the fastest growing crime in the country. So are we where we need to be there? No. Are we, challenged with visibility? We are. But if you look at what we've done in Dublin, where we've dedicated people to high visibility policing, it's actually a historical plan that was done many, many years ago and has been brought back to the fore thanks to AC Cleary and his work on that. We've seen that that's quite effective and it's had a positive, result. And based on that, based on what we're seeing in terms of that pilot, we're looking at replicating that in other places. So it's a bit of a nuanced conversation, but it is based on looking at things like, calls for service and other sources of demand, trying to combine that with what's needed in terms of key levels of specialization to make sure that we can get both visibility and the specialization that's required.
Okay. Just to say, I suppose there's a strong view from the community to support an approach which would improve visibility and resourcing in the community area. And I suppose particularly now as you see the establishment of the local community safety partnerships, I'd imagine the emphasis there is likely to grow. So I'm sure that the pilot will have informed you, and it's something maybe we'll come back to at a further meeting to see how the rollout nationally is going to evolve.
Yes, and certainly that's underway already in terms of looking at other places where we'll do that next, and you'll see more of that in the next couple of months. But if there's a meeting where AC Cleary is here, it would also be helpful just to give his experiences, because at a local level, in terms of meeting with business associations, et cetera, it's turned out to be an extremely positive result. And so we're looking for, it's not just about increasing numbers, it's putting them in those key places where visibility will mean the most.
Okay, thank you, Deputy. And just to another dimension, I suppose, that has come across to us from the questionnaire was really concerns around the decision-making within Garda Síochána, and a view which was expressed very much by Garda members and staff during the consultation exercise was around the reluctance among management to take decisions being escalated unnecessarily and creating as a result unnecessary bureaucracy in order to ensure what they perceived as cover. I'd be really interested to hear the Commissioner's views and his reaction in relation to that perception.
Was that my question there?
Yes.
I get far too much stuff to make decisions on, and in part the operating model, the focus on divisions then being the building block, the basic building block in which we provide all our policing services, means then that they, within the tram lines we as an organisation create around policy and procedure, governance, and also proper procedures in terms of public money. But then within that, then they have a huge amount of operational autonomy. And in part, I can echo perhaps some of the same frustrations. There is a requirement for as we move forward, obviously, to be agile as an organisation. It's sort of a game of two halves here. Managers can be very agile, very quick to move around operational matters, around investigations, etc., but less so perhaps around governance and management. And perhaps then it's just giving them the confidence to make decisions around personnel, around finances, and be supported then through the business service function at a divisional level to do so. So they do have access to people who can give expert advice and allow them then to be in a position to make well-considered decisions, obviously within an overall policy framework. But the intention is, you know, if decisions rise too high, it is a course of inefficiency. It is a cause of inefficiency. And sometimes it's nice to know, but it's not necessary to know everything, and you one possibly can't do that. So the more that autonomy of decision making settles in, the better it'll be for us all.
Okay. And are there actually actions underway to try and improve that sense of confidence of people to make decisions at the appropriate level?
Well, I think that's a constant development of our own managers, both Garda members and Garda staff, in effect to create the framework. And a large part of the operating model is about creating the framework to allow them to make decisions. Regretfully, a lot of our muscle memory was constantly things being referred back to headquarters, and that muscle memory's there, whereas it's perhaps not particularly useful in a modern world where things are happening very quickly and require pretty quick response. And really, you know, no human resource issue or finance issue gains a lot by the time the reports have travelled up and down. It's far better, particularly like a human resource issue can be dealt with quickly within the organisational guidelines in a fair and equitable manner, which is represented across and Garda Síochána as a total. So it does require all of our managers to be skilled in the actual science of management, just beyond leadership, and also then for the members, for in effect the Garda members who are managers, not only to have a competence around police work, but also have a competence to deal with finance, HR issues, but also then to know to ask for advice if necessary.
Okay. Thank you,
Siobhan,
Commissioner.
No, that's okay. Fine. Okay.
Okay. That concludes the questions for me, but that theme is one that's going to come up for other people in the course of the meeting as well. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Martina. And Tony O'Brien is now going to take item 11 on the agenda on individual performance management.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioner. So we have a particular interest in this in the context of the opportunities afforded by the new regulations in April this year. And we're aware that the previous authority was informed that there was a review of the PALF system commenced in April 2022. So specifically, I'd like to ask, first of all, if that's been concluded and what the key outcomes are.
So the review of the PALF had commenced. It isn't complete despite those number of years in terms of other priorities that had arisen for the organisation. However, you referred to new key aspects in terms of unsatisfactory performance and attendance that has escalated from the Act that we now have interim policy and procedure in place for. In addition to implementing that, we're committed to reviewing PALF because it frankly is of its time and there are elements of it we do want to reform. In addition to that, we have been recently implementing as well a performance framework for Garda staff. So thank you.
Can we continue our discussion in this in the context of the independent review of roads policing that was shared with the authority in June? It's clear from that report, which makes for grim reading in some respects, that there are very significant differences in performance in the widest sense between different divisions within Garda Síochána. And there are a number of comments within that report about the extent to which supervision is used effectively to manage individual performance, and even some comments related to, you know, some members basically not being interested in being in the roads policing unit. So in the context of that, can I ask, since receiving that report, what actions are contemplated or have already been taken?
Thank you. So we've accepted the recommendations from that report. We have a high-level steering group as well as a working group that's working through all of the different recommendations piece by piece, including the one that you've referenced there. Perhaps I'll turn over to AC Hillman. We had a meeting this week at a high level to go through each and every one of them. So with respect to that piece, we're going to have to look at the policy. There is, as you would note in the report, wording in the policy that seems to have led to some confusion about how it should be applied, so we're looking at that. But then we are also using the opportunity to look at the new performance regulations to see where that would be a good fit, potentially to pilot engagement regarding how it can be managed better going forward now that we have these new regulations. So, AC Hellman, I don't know if I've missed anything.
No, thanks. Thank you, Deputy. Yes, as Deputy said, Deputy's established a quarterly governance group with the 4 regional ACs and executive directors of HR and finance, given that there's so many overlap across all 4 areas of work. I'm currently chairing the working group in relation to that. The first 3 priorities that were given to that were review of the PALF policy, the further development of the performance framework, and the allocation of vehicles to the roads policing units. So we have the necessary representatives from both HR and business services at that, and there's already a number of actions actioned out from the first project team meeting, which meets monthly. There's some other areas of work as well in relation to the finalisation of policies and procedures, which will sit with the National Roads Policing Bureau, and also equipment. And we had done quite a lot of work last year in equipment, so we can update on some of that, but we're continuing to look at ensuring we have the best equipment, including vehicles. You know, we did do a review of the fleet and did issue new vehicles to roads policing last year, and a new roads policing livery for roads policing cars. So all that other work is ongoing as well. But what we're going to do specifically, and it's what the Deputy mentioned potentially in relation to looking at this as a pilot, is how we then, with the 4 regions, because as you are aware, the tasking of roads policing and the supervision of roads policing sits under the 4 regional assistant commissioners and the respective divisional officers, but how we can work with the 4 regions, and we're going to do some work with specifically all of roads policing sergeants and inspectors, and that's something certainly that then we can look at how we could maybe look at that wider across the organisation. But we have the pockets of good practice which were identified, how we share that to then balance it out where we're not seeing that level of performance.
Thank you. Is it fair to conclude from that answer that you see this as having generalisable lessons across the service? And if so, what are you doing beyond the roads policing unit in that regard?
Yes, there is. I think first of all, we have these conduct regulations, but individual performance management, when it's dealing with a great majority, will never get close to actually those performance regulations, so to say. It should actually be about managing their performance, developing their career, and pointing out and assisting where perhaps performance has fallen back or skills aren't what they might be. So there's lots of areas where this is applicable. We'll be talking later, I would say, about the inspector's report in terms of our first response to domestic abuse. That's an area, obviously, where we'd want to have an assessment of how people are doing when they take that on, and how we could improve their performance. So it is a shift. There was a reading of a certain policy which was a distortion, and that then has given people the sense that they individually are not going to be in effect held to account to what their work is in the workplace. So we have to shift away from that. The report into roads policing just gives a segment example of a far larger pie of work that we need to do. And so this isn't just about roads policing. This will be universal to the Garda members and how they perform in the workplace, and how they're given a fair assessment of what their work is. And if it's good, that's great. If there are some failings, then what the intervention should be.
Thank you, Commissioner. Can I ask also about the rollout or non-rollout of the PMDS insofar as it relates to the civilian or non-attested staff within AGS?
So I suppose in addition to what's been mentioned, firstly, I suppose there's a focus on the culture of performance management more generally speaking, organisationally. So we've already referred to the PALF process and approach for members that is being reviewed, and we've mentioned there are some issues with it. We did not have in place a performance management process for Garda staff, the other group of personnel within the organisation. So as you'll be aware, Garda staff are aligned to civil service terms and conditions. So we have adopted the PMDS approach from the civil service. We have just commenced the first phase of implementation within one particular job family, and are learning the lessons in terms of how that is being adopted and being utilised, with the intention next year to roll out across the whole of the organisation. However, to support that in terms of the broader strategic framework, in addition to focusing on what is a good culture, what is a culture that promotes performance management, and how do you inculcate that across the piece, we've just recently established a new dedicated national performance management unit within People and Development, within Human Resources, specifically focused on individual linked to organisational performance. And I think also it is important to say the work that's been done by the collective senior team with regards to real clear focus on organisational priorities, very much so everyone understanding what's required of each job, family or head of profession, and then what that means in terms of individual performance against that. Other aspects that are chief to delivering on what I've mentioned, that culture, is performance management is also now embedded in our selection processes. So for the most senior member promotions, through to Garda staff specialist roles, through to Garda staff and Garda member promotions, performance management is a feature of those. And then through to the training and development is there to support. So I suppose back to the start, it is about addressing all of those key pieces, not just simply PMDS and PALF itself. Thank you.
Thank you for that very comprehensive answer. Do you see potential for crossover between the systems being used for the civilian or non-attested staff and the attested staff, given the obvious ambition to have a single organisation with a single performance culture, and how do you intend to approach that?
So the ambition is we have a unified way of managing performance across the organisation. I suppose where we sit at this point in time is there are two systems and two approaches, which I don't envisage to change in the short term. However, what we are doing to ensure that there is alignment around how we performance manage is arranging key briefings within the future around the whole thing of, irrespective of whether you're a member of staff, what is required of you to lead and manage your teams and to supervise. In addition to that, we are yet to launch a procurement process for human capital management system, which is absolutely required to ensure whatever approach we have in the future, it is modern, it is tech-enabled, and it is agile. So I would say at this point in time, it is envisaged we will have two systems for the foreseeable.
Thank you. As I said, this is going to be one of the enduring themes, I think, that we'll be coming back to over time. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tony. Just a bit of background to the report. It was brought to the authorities' attention in June, and we discussed it in June, and we're here today discussing it as well. And I understand, Commissioner, was brought to your attention and those matters, and you proactively acted on it, and that very much reflects a cultural change within the organisation, that uncomfortable truths are ones that you seek to confront rather than put under the carpet, and we hope that this approach will be one that will continue under the new Commissioner. I would say this on behalf of the authority: it was a shocking report. I know that that's a view that you would share. And it's one that is of deep concern to the authority in terms of the performance management of Garda Síochána. And I know that it's one that the Chief Corporate Officer, Siobhan Toll, and yourself are deeply concerned about.
For our part, we don't disagree with your analysis in terms of it being a very poor reflection of the performance of some individuals. Some within roads policing obviously carrying out their duties with diligence and commitment, but a substantial minority, and it's very clear from the report, seem to have little interest in roads policing. So you've heard that there's a working group being set up. It's going to meet quarterly. There's recommendations, but as is reflected in your own annual report for 2024, this does drive the agenda around individual performance management, and something then that we want to pick up. And in effect then the new performance regulations also give us the tools to deal with those who in effect, within the report, and you'll have seen the comments, have been quite brazen in their disinterest in their work. And it is important work. It is road safety. Enforcement does make a difference, and we want to maximise our effectiveness through the personnel that we have dedicated to that. It's a very expensive resource in total, and we want to make sure we're getting good value for money from that resource.
Thank you. And I know that the Chief Corporate Officer, Siobhan Toll, you are also quite concerned about this, because this is a report that looked at roads policing, but it is a concern across the service in terms of performance management.
Yes, of course, Chair. We're deeply concerned about it, and I think Yvonne alluded to our requirement to build on the performance culture in the organisation, which is, let's face it, at quite an immature stage. Perhaps if I could just add one thing to the conversation to date, I think it relates to the conversation from Miss Maloney and others. We do have a role to make sure that management are confident in their decision-making around performance management. We have some critical training enablers in place. For example, there's a very solid programme where supervisors and assistant principals, which are key to performance management, come together and share a leadership and learning experience. And I think, as Yvonne alluded to, there's a key element of that around performance management and training. And I suppose there's a duty for me in my role to make sure that my team support the divisions and the specialist units in terms of performance management, and that national office that Yvonne spoke to is going to be critical in relation to that. But there's a step up required, but it is most certainly a priority.
Thank you, Siobhan. And the job of the authorities to oversee the performance of An Garda Síochána, and this is a topic that we will be returning to, and we look forward to seeing the progress of your work, Yvonne and Siobhan. So I now move to Mr. Joe Costello on item 12, who will talk on GardaSAFE and returning to calls for service.
Thank you, Elaine. Commissioner, this is one of the areas, the whole question of responding to calls for service from the public, that came up quite a bit in our consultation on the policing priorities and indeed in other engagements as well. The change in the system in terms of 999 and the new computer-aided dispatch system that has been put in place. So obviously the purpose is to improve the service and to maximise the resources. Now, it seems to have brought quite an amount of confusion in the public mind, and indeed there's a lot of concern amongst Garda as well about it distancing them to a degree from the actual community. So my first question would be, could you perhaps clarify for us when it's appropriate to ring 999 and when it's appropriate to contact the local station? And perhaps then arising out of that, you might further give some indication as to ensuring that when you don't go on to the CAD system, that other calls don't fall through the system and fall into the cracks and are lost.
Thank you very much. If I turn to Shauna, please, first.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's an important question, and you'll see that we very recently did a video publicly speaking about this matter. This comes out of two things that have happened around the same time. One is we have GardaSAFE, which is a wonderful new system, modernizing how we deal with 999. And we have historically had to deal with the Penalty Commission, which you'll be aware of. So the challenge is that when calls come into the station, they aren't recorded, and there's no capacity at the station to deploy a car. So we would welcome people to ring their local station as they do for information, if they want to speak to a local guard. But it's at the point where if somebody needs to be dispatched, we need it to go through the GardaSAFE system. And so they'll be transferred through to a central line to do that. And that's to ensure that all calls are recorded and that we can track them and that we can make sure that things don't fall through the cracks, as you've noted. However, we note that many people physically come into Garda stations. We welcome that. I think that's a very special relationship that we have with communities. And many people will ring just for information at stations. It's really at the point where someone is going to be dispatched that it must go through to the central system. And that's really about just ensuring that it's captured, that there is a record and that we can follow through on people being sent in terms of going to the call.
And that's operating in the 4 regional areas at the present time. And have you any idea of how effective it is and how much improvement it has made on the previous system?
If you physically look at the system, it's a much improved system overall. What we had before was extremely antiquated in terms of records management and just being able to dispatch calls. For example, there were no maps on the old system, which is something that is extraordinary. But the new system is much better. I can tell you that the policy, and I'll turn over to AC Hellman, who's responsible for the policy, that is in the process of being reviewed. The policy, when it was written, was new for An Garda Síochána. It was done with a lot of consultation, particularly for those who do the call taking and the dispatching, and their input was taken into consideration. We need to take that input again because, as a system embeds, we start to realize there might be more or less guidance needed in particular areas. So perhaps if I turn over to AC Hellman to talk about that. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Deputy. Yes, so within the first year of deployment, we are very much listening to feedback both from our own members, from yourselves, from the communities. And, I understand, and the Deputy has alluded to how important that local contact is as well. But I think it's really to emphasise that these are where people need an immediate Garda response. So this is people need the Guards to come, and this is the best way. We still support very much local community policing guards and the engagement with them. But where you need the Guards to come to a call there and then, phone in 999 or 112 to allow us to grade whether it's emergency call, a non-emergency call, and then to deploy the most appropriate resource. And depending on the level of emergency, it allows us to look at what is the closest available resource to go to that initially. Maybe just to give you some context of what we now know, and we've looked at the past year, so from the 1st of May 2024 to the 1st of May 2025. So just to give you an example of what we know, because this is now all recorded and collated and quality assured centrally. There were over 1,200,000 contact records. So that's people contacting who came into contact with the regional control centres. From that's translated. 83% of those became incidents. So that's when we go to record it on to Pulse. So that's over 1,560,000 of those records became incidents. So a record would be somebody phone up saying, what's the opening hours of my local Garda station? Some very local thing so the contact doesn't need to become an incident. The incidents then, that's where we review them. They go to the dispatcher to see whether or not we will have, and we need to dispatch a Garda resource to that. And if you look at the number then of incidents, only 16% of those were then resolved without deployment. So, 84% then become responses that we will respond to. So we have all that data to understand the nature of the calls, the volume of the calls. I know we're going to talk later about domestic abuse, but we have that data. So overall, that summarises, that was the annual figures. So basically, we receive 3,300 calls a day across our 4 regional control centres. 2,755 daily are recorded as incidents, and 2,305 of those are attended. So that's the data that gives us, and it allows us then also to see, review the quality of the calls and ensure that we are allocating the necessary resource to the risk of the call.
That's great. Thank you very much for that data. And are you able to send us a copy of that?
Certainly we can, and we can get it even across the 4 regional control centres as well, because we can do that. So certainly we can get that to you.
Great. Yes. So the other side of the coin then, let's say when it's not an emergency, it doesn't become a follow-up incident, and it comes in through the station.
Yes.
How do we ensure that goes on the Pulse? How do we ensure that is recorded and logged and acted on?
So the current process then is if someone calls into the station and it is a call for service, it is transferred to the regional control centre and a call transfer log is recorded. If it is something that can be dealt with at the station level, potentially someone's in to get passport, or some ongoing issue to speak to a guard about an individual investigation, or a community guard about a local issue, that will remain at the station, at station level. But if it's a call for service at all, it is transferred into the Regional Control Centre. That's the current process. Looking forward, medium term, we are looking at other IT models that exist. There's things like interactive voice response and how people can be transferred. But at the moment, that's the current process.
So anybody, maybe not considered an emergency, but contacts the station or contacts Community Guard or whatever, they are now obliged to see that it is recorded with the new computer-aided system.
No, if they're coming in for like a local issue, no, that won't be. That will be dealt with in the station.
And it'll be dealt with in the station.
Locally.
And it's recorded in the station.
Yes.
Right.
So it's when it's a call for service. So when we need to respond to a call to service, that is when it gets transferred to the Regional Control Centre. If it's the local issue, some of, as I say, an ongoing investigation, something coming in, maybe, ongoing issues, perhaps, for example, a community Gardaí, and maybe they're working with the local community safety partnership, looked at maybe antisocial behaviour in a specific area, and it's a more medium-term problem-solving approach or shorter-term problem-solving approach. So that will be dealt with locally. But when there's a call for service needed, then that is when it's transferred to the Regional Control Centre. And then it's graded as into the level of emergency of that. If it's immediate response, the calls are graded into the level of urgency depending on the nature of the call. But I think the message very much, and the work that you'd heard that AC Cleary had done, who had this work before prior to me, is you need the guards to come, if you need a guard response to anything, 999 or 112, call, and you will be put into the relevant Regional Control Centre to get the call for service. If you do not need that immediate response, and it's a matter you want advice or you want to speak to a guard, that's when then you can contact your local Garda station.
Very good. So that's the system, and you think it's working fairly efficiently, and you'll provide us with the data in relation to that. But there is still a lot of confusion in the public mind. Now, I saw the video, the GardaSAFE video, and it's very good. It does the job very well, but it's related purely to a rural setting. And have you any plans for providing an urban setting, which would be very different to the response, the manner you respond to the call for service in the rural fashion, in the rural area? For example, could you suggest that there would be an urban video done that would be on the same template, more or less? And secondly, that because to get the message out to the public, which seems to be failing at the present time, that say that these videos would be made available at least to the 36 new partnerships that are being established, and to other relevant bodies as well. Because I think there's a bit of a failing between a new system that's in place. Some of the Gardaí aren't sure about it, a lot of them aren't sure about it, and the public in general are very unsure about it, because they've always seen 999 as being purely for emergencies, not for incidents that have to be pursued. So I think maybe you could look at a broader plan for
communication,
for promoting it abroad to the public in general.
I think one of the key things here is if people aren't sure and they do ring the local station, and it is something that needs to go through the GardaSAFE system, then this will be explained to them and they will be transferred. I know a lot of people, I don't think having a separate video would help. Obviously, we'll take that away and we'll reflect, of course. But actually, one of the key challenges that we are trying to deal with by way of the new GardaSAFE system is historically when people would call the local station and guards would be sent, there would be no record. There were a lot of situations where that occurred. So if people are used to ringing their local station, we don't want to discourage people from doing that. They just should. And then let the Gardaí who are there ascertain whether or not do we need to send a car out. And if we do, then that's fine. We'll have to transfer you. And it's the transferring piece to the GardaSAFE system, to the control room. I do get that that's frustrating. That's the piece. But I'd rather people ring the local station and at least then get the service, have someone speak to them and then go through if they're unsure. So does that make sense in terms of what I'm saying?
Yeah, it makes sense, all right. It's just that there still remains that public promotion aspect of it that's required, because we're changing the system. And I mean, it's been bet into people's minds for decades now, that 999 is emergency. Now we have a different use for 999. And I think we do need to promote it on a much higher level than perhaps it has been at present.
999 is still emergencies, but lower level calls that you might not think are an emergency, we
999
still need us.
also-
Yeah.
And also requires the response. That's for response purposes. So it has got it has a new meaning to what it had in the past.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
how do you get that out into the public arena? That's what we really want to pursue.
And it's certainly something, it's 999 or 112, so I think,
Or 112.
but as well, so it is, the 999 is the Deputy Secretary for Emergencies. But I think I think a very valid point. I mean, just today, in terms of the issue is about community safety partnerships. Today, we're just finalising the list of our community engagement superintendents that we're forwarding, who will be our representatives on the LCSPs in each of the 36 LCSPs. So I mean, I think that actually that's a real good conduit of how we can continue to promote this message. And I do think this is something we just need to continue regularly over the coming next year, because it is understandable. People, I know many have the number of the local Garda station on the fridge or wherever they have it, and they contact the local guard. But we will continue with that message, and as you say, internally as well. So we have our internal to our own members, and then externally to the community. So I think certainly, that, as you said, Joe, the LCSPs will be able to help us, I think, hopefully in that regard as well.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so before we go to the next item, Helen Hall has a quick question.
It's just a supplementary really to what Joe's been talking about there, because I'm still hearing slightly different messages, and I think even I live in a rural area and there's confusion among people. I would agree with what Joe says. I don't think a lot of people understand that when you ring 999, there is a triage done, that actually they almost don't want to bother you, even though they do need a call for service. So I think the default message is almost, if you need a guard to come to you or for service, you ring 999 or 112. If you make a mistake and ring your local service, you still will ultimately, but it is a slower way to get there. So the quickest way to get service is to ring 999. And it's not that you're going to be bothering the guards. They will triage it. If they think it's low level, they'll decide when they've resources. Isn't that the essence of it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that clarity, Helen. And I think just that conversation exemplifies why, perhaps as Joe suggested, more information to the public around what happens when you ring 99. It's not that you're going to get a slower service at all. Always ring 99 if you need the attention of the guards or the emergency services. You won't, as Helen said, be bothering them. That's their job to triage. The next item is on large-scale event planning, and Ms. Frida McKittrick is going to lead.
Thank you, Chair. We had two reports before us in June in relation to a large-scale event in Dublin and around the planning for that event. And it brings us back to something we've already discussed in this meeting, which is around agility of decision-making and the ability to review different circumstances as they developed during the course of planning for an event. And the reports, acknowledge that the objectives in terms of the security were met, but they raised serious concerns about efficiencies in terms of value for money and the deployment of staffing. And specifically, they talked about issues with ongoing risk assessment, effectively that it wasn't taking place, that there was not sufficient review of the arrangements, allowing then different decisions to be taken in line as new information became available. They talked about the need to be responding efficiently to threats and deploying resources more efficiently as new information comes to light. And they felt that the resulting waste resulted from an overly risk-averse approach. So as we are looking forward to the EU presidency in 2026, this is going to be a very live issue involving numerous events across numerous locations. So what I'd really like to hear about is what learning has been taken from the reports, how that learning is going to be put into practice for the preparation of the EU events, And again, back to this piece about whether the Commissioner is satisfied that the leadership is sufficiently empowered to engage in iterative decision-making in line with the Garda decision-making model, even if it means dialing back on plans that have been made place as more information comes to light, which suggests risks may have been reduced. And within that, if you can please tell us about how resource planning can be improved to avoid the significant waste of public money that was outlined in the two reports. For example, there was a discussion in the report regarding the non-response from members delaying a clear sense of their availability for defence, and I think there were some gaps between decisions being made and then being communicated, meaning that the notice periods were quite short to then book hotels and make reservations, which meant that obviously it wasn't as financially advantageous as it might have been. And then just as final one to follow up on that is whether there will be increased peer review of planning for the EU presidency events. So a lot in that question, but we'll unpick it as we go along. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll hand over to the Deputy here in a moment. Well, the specific operation happened, and we did think ourselves that there was learning to be drawn from it, and therefore then we commissioned that work. So, and in sharing it with yourselves, I think it's illustrative that we have adopted a learning mindset to the recommendations, but also just the general principles that are being outlined in the report, and also then. I'm very alive to my own responsibilities and the responsibilities of the organisation around, as you said yourself, value for money. So the delivery of a policing service, but as we're spending public money, also delivering then on value for money. So the learning from that then has been applied then to the process, even at this stage of looking at EU 26. We've already had to submit our first estimate in respect of expenditure, and there's been a number of meetings that I've been involved in where we've worked that through in terms of what the reasonable prospects would be in terms of the deployment against what we see at this moment of time as being, whilst at the same time maintaining our policing service to the citizens of Ireland is able to maintain as well. We can't just be left if we only do one thing in the latter half of next year, and that's deliver a policing function for EU 26. We'll have 6 months of other police work ongoing as well. So we are very acutely aware that even with our resources, they are finite, and we have to be very then cautious and considered in respect of how much resources we devote to any one operation. Because even it's not just about the money's important, but it's also then just the viability of keeping on turning out Garda members at a whole series of events. Like in the end, we'll exhaust them as well. So we have a very practical deployment constraint of just how much our people can work, Garda members and Garda staff. So if I might turn over then to Shauna just for some of the other specifics. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's two reports, and what's happened with them internally is they've gone to the Assistant Commissioner of Governance and Accountability, who has brought them together and has sought feedback from various members across our senior leadership team. I think that is important because that feedback has not come up yet through the SLT to the executive. And I only share that because I expect that there may be further feedback on the reports. So if you can consider this kind of a first, this is what they say, we need to come back to you with that, and that internal piece hasn't happened yet. I do want to point out that one of the reports, because you talked about the time frame, that really stems from the revenue disclosure, and it might sound like they're not related, but they are, because it was a recommendation directly from that. So we had a robust system in place. We went from that system to actually having to shift very quickly because we had to do it differently, but we didn't have a new system through which to do it differently. And that led to some of the gaps that you've read about. So that piece around the timing certainly has been, that gap has been closed, and we've seen that dealt with more positively since then. What we've done with respect to the EU presidency is we had to give initial costings, as the Commissioner noted. Many of the times when we give costings, we do so based on a high-risk scenario, because we are always worried we don't want to be caught out, right? So we want to make sure we have enough Gardaí, we have the resources that we need, et cetera. So we want to be prepared for kind of the worst-case scenario, if you will. So what we're doing this time is we've done those costings, and now we're doing a second pass with respect to what is the low-risk scenario, so that when you talk about a risk-based approach, that actually at the highest level for the EU presidency, for all the meetings, we will immediately have a range that can be considered. And so we want to combine that with some sort of a challenge function. I don't know what that will look like. It exists in other jurisdictions, and we're speaking internally about different options in terms of how we could do that, so that there can be more agility and further discussions as we go along. We have people who are very well trained in running these events and have done them before, so it's really a matter of supporting them as they get ready for the EU presidency in a way that allows for a range of options to be considered.
Okay, thank you. I just want to come back then just to talk a little bit more. I mean, you've given us lots of kind of practical information and processes, and that's very helpful, but there is the theme kind of running through a number of pieces, which is individual decision making and people feeling confident to make decisions that they need to make within their roles. And you spoke about that earlier, Commissioner, about needing that agility. So I suppose it's then moving into the, again, performance area and the staff resources, and whether you've got good enough data to make sure that you've got, from your rostering, to make sure that you've got the right level of analysis of people that you need, and that people can make decisions as they go without being concerned about decision paralysis. So if you could just maybe talk a little bit about that for us.
Perhaps this is best taken in terms of just against what we perceive to be the risks, even at this distance out. Now, this will become far more refined when we've a good deal more detail, and a lot of that still has to be fleshed out. But it is what it is what our risk appetite is for the actual operation, and then being able to articulate that, but also be able to explain that to the various stakeholders engaged in this whole program of events. But definitely we have a very clear responsibility around the policing and the security of these, and there are a number of different facets to that. So there's both a uniform, but also perhaps then there will be an intelligence element to that, but also then if there is disorder, etc., like we'll have an investigative element as well to follow through on. So, but we need to, I suppose, articulate clearly then, and in fact empower our chief superintendents and superintendents to understand again what is their range of discretion here. And not just always, or not just go to the point of ask for the maximum there, because that makes it very difficult then for considered decision making in a across the organisation whenever we're trying to set down what resources are needed where for what period of time.
Thank you. There may be questions from my colleagues, but that's enough for me at the moment.
Thank you very much, Frida. And we're now going to talk about domestic abuse, and Ms. Emma Reedy is going to lead on this topic.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Commissioner. The Garda Inspector report was published in March of 2025 this year, and while levels of reporting on domestic abuse and coercive control are increasing year on year, despite these increases, 39% of people surveyed cited that they didn't report their most recent incident of domestic abuse or coercive control. And with that in mind, they cited dissatisfaction levels of 48%. This does generally concur with a recent report published by Women's Aid citing dissatisfaction levels of 44%. Why are victims essentially not satisfied, and why are they not reporting? What do you think the issue is?
Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. Good afternoon. So I suppose we acknowledge the 52 recommendations in the Inspector's report. 11 of those recommendations have been fully implemented to date, and we're working both internally and with partners in relation to the other recommendations. However, there are a very small number, and we have provided written feedback to yourselves in relation to it, that we're not in a position to accept because they just fall outside of the scope, and there are legislative challenges there as well. So we've provided some written rationale, I suppose, as to why we're not in a position to accept 3 of them. But in terms of the feedback and acknowledging the feedback in the inspector's report and other stakeholders, we absolutely acknowledge that we have more to do around that first contact, and I think that's where most of our issues appear to be. We obviously welcome the acknowledgement that once a case gets as far as a domestic or a divisional protective services unit, or even into the Garda National Protective Services Bureau, that people are very satisfied with the response they get. So we have done a lot of work with Yvonne's team in the college and with Chief Superintendent Brian Sugru, because we acknowledge that what people are looking for is that we would be more trauma aware. So we are doing, it might be just useful if I tell you some of the things we're doing to date. So we need to get across all of our front line. So we've started doing seminars with frontline members at all ranks, and these are led by the Garda National Protective Services Bureau. And senior management from that bureau have undertaken 8 seminars to date since 2024, because you'll be aware that report, we had a lot of engagement, so we're aware of these issues. It is a report that has been in gestation, if you like, for a number of years. So we would hope that if that same survey was to be done today, that the result might be more positive. So we've done those, but a major development today, we have reintroduced our CBD, so our continuous professional development training. So you'll be aware that in the midst of COVID, we had to discontinue that. But as of today, that has been re-established. We have all of our sergeants trained. All of the trainers are trained already. We've done a bespoke course, and that includes significant input in relation to domestic, sexual and gender-based violence, coercive control, new legislation that has arisen, and then obviously the new domestic abuse policy and procedure document that we issued earlier in the year. So that will be a significant development. It's mandatory training and it's in person and will be over a 2-day period. So that's for guards and sergeants. We're also in conversation in relation to senior management training around trauma awareness, because in order for us to become trauma informed, there are a number of steps, and we've engaged with academics in this area. So we know we need to become aware and then become sensitive to trauma, and then we become responsive and finally informed. So we're on a journey, but I think the first piece starts with a top-down and bottom-up approach, which we're pleased to say that we're well on the way in relation to that frontline CBD training. We'll continue with the seminars, but I suppose in reviewing the CBD training and the feedback from the seminars, we may move to streamline the seminars into the actual training rather than duplicating, because a lot of it is similar. It's similar content, and I suppose that whole piece around making sure that we have that academic input and that we're informed, I suppose, more informed about what that needs to look like at the front line. But we do acknowledge that we have to do better, particularly in that first contact, and the impact that that first contact can have on, the continuing, I suppose, engagement of the victim, and then that whole process around a criminal justice outcome for them, and then their subsequent recovery. We're fully mindful of that impact there, and in the serious cases, obviously, they will proceed on to the Divisional Protective Services units, and we, as I said, we're very heartened that that response and all of that investment that we've put in, and we talked earlier about, the competing demands between visibility and specialisation. But I think that's certainly an area where specialisation has paid off for us as an organisation in this really key area. So I suppose, again, it's just to try and give that appreciation that we have to, this is an area that we need to continue to invest in. We've done a complete review of domestic of the DPSU units around the country, and a report has been concluded. Now, at the minute, that's being considered by the Commissioner and senior leadership team.
I might come back to that in a moment,
Okay.
AC Willis, if that's okay.
Yeah.
To come back to your point in relation to the Garda Inspector report and those 52 recommendations, of those recommendations, 38 were actually apportioned to An Garda Síochána. You mentioned that some of those recommendations have fall outside your remit.
Mm-hmm.
Are you speaking of recommendations that were previously allocated under your scope of the 38, or are they already the acknowledged number of recommendations that do fall outside your scope?
They're a combination of both. So when we revisited the 52, there's one in particular that comes to mind that falls within the scope of the court services.
Mm-hmm.
So we will obviously work with the court services in relation to the implementation of that, but I can provide you with written feedback on the actual work that we have done on each of them and where they now sit. And I think that's actually subject of
I think that would be
request.
very
Anyway,
much
yeah.
welcomed on the basis that it would be helpful to understand what we're progressing towards
Yes.
in that regard. You did mention the internal review, and I'm keen to having an understanding that phase 1 of that internal review is complete. Can you give an update in relation to the status of that at the moment?
So this is the review in relation to the Divisional Protective Services units now,
Okay.
as opposed to another review.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that review has been completed. There are a number of recommendations, but as I said, they have to be internally considered before we move to implementing them. And they kind of fall under areas that we're already doing some work on. So they fall really under resourcing, training, and then systems around the recording of relevant information.
Recent media reports of court outcomes pertaining to Gardaí and ex-Garda members linked to quite serious crimes like domestic abuse, coercive control and assault generally provide and have provided an important message to victims that perpetrators, irrespective of who they are, victims can and should speak out. With a focus again that appropriate safeguarding and investigative measures will be applied. You yourself, Commissioner, have introduced changes to tackle domestic abuse and coercive control with regard to Garda personnel. I wonder if you could explain and take us through what the impact of those changes are since you've introduced some of those measures.
Well, yes, there's been a series of recent cases, well, throughout the year, and even just yesterday, I issued a memo to the organisation, one saying that domestic abuse, coercive control, sexual assault, misogyny was entirely unacceptable in the workplace, entirely unacceptable in our society, but particularly unacceptable in Garda Síochána, but also commending those Garda members who had undertaken investigations and reported the DPP, and in the end we have seen convictions for some very, very serious offences, and they represent, I think, the very highest standards of Garda Síochána, and one which promotes public confidence. And so when you look to the overall confidence of victims as articulated both in the Inspectorate report and the Women's Aid report, I would point to then the very competent and professional work that has been undertaken by the specialists in particular within the DPSUs, and that has been a very important specialisation for us. We've also done analysis then in respect of various orders, the domestic orders, and that has been submitted in report form to the authority, and we'll be shortly then to report down on the second part of that, which is an analysis of allegations and then investigations and prosecutions. So that is just in part being finalised. So I'd like to emphasise that we have an ongoing focus on this. As far as I'm concerned, we are an organisation of zero tolerance around violence towards women. We very recently through Avon, we've made approaches to our own staff associations. They're not part of the Irish Congress of Trade Unions. Trade unions have taken a very strong stance against domestic abuse, and we've invited the associations to in effect do something similar or join on to what the Irish Congress of Trade Unions have already said about no place for domestic abuse in the workforce. And I think just this point about first contact is really important to us. You know, we've two reports in effect which cooperate with each other, and indeed you pick it up in your own strategic priorities around the consistent high level of standard that first contact should be made. So AC Willis has set out the various training uplifts. They are extensive, actually, the work that we're doing in respect of that. But also, I would say we need to reinforce that as well with behaviours at the station level, and that is through supervision. It's not unrelated, actually, to the performance conversation and how well people actually engage with victims. So overall, you know, if we get the first contact with the victims of these crimes right, that improves our overall service overall, and will increase confidence in Garda Síochána. So it's very important. Within the recommendations, there's very important recommendations just for our overall response to these crimes in the first place, but also then public confidence and how we respond, and overall public confidence in Garda Síochána. But it just, you know, I want to reiterate, we have zero tolerance towards domestic abuse, serious sexual assault, coercive control within Garda Síochána. And if there is any victims within our workforce, then they should come forward to supervisor or someone else in position that they can receive assistance. And I would say the same then to any member of the public. I'm very aware that this is underreported. Many incidents happen and are never reported to in Garda Síochána, and whereas we should be intervening. We had 64,000 incidents last year. So this is regrettably, you know, a major plank of our work in responding to the public, and we need to make sure that we get it right. Such an important area. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm very positive to hear that from the most senior level in leadership, that the emphasis on workplace response to it. I suppose there's been much said about the role of specialist units today, and great to hear the reinforcement, particularly in the areas of DSGBV. However, the majority of domestic abuse cases that are responded to by members in regular units. And while it is encouraging to see the rollout of the risk evaluation tools, the RETs, via mobile devices, I suppose a question I hold is that, are you satisfied that members carry that requisite skill, training and competency to dynamically assess situations as they present, with the ultimate view that they are responding to risk and with a pursuit to decrease it, and then with the intention of maximising safety?
Well, the inspector pointed out to where we could be doing better in this area, so we take their comments and their recommendations in respect of this seriously. I would point out that our risk assessment tool initially started paper-based. It's now moving across onto the mobility app, and we keep on learning more around its use. But 5 years ago we didn't have it. We're better off for having it, and we can apply then some objective standard to this. The next piece then is the training, which AC Willis has already outlined. That trauma-informed training actually assists in respect of assessing risk. But we're also very conscious about the recognition of risk to children as well, and the TUSLA referrals that should be happening too.
Yeah. I note that there's positive results coming back to the callback, the 7-day callback rates, which is encouraging to see. I suppose with that in mind, it does emphasise callback to reinforce best practice where it relates to victim engagement. How satisfied are you that callbacks really in the aftermath reinforce information sharing, signposting to appropriate services, case or complaint update? And with that in mind, is there a view that members can go into that post-engagement with the capacity to reassess the risk post-incident?
Well, the purpose of the continuing engagement is the reality being when one receives the first complaint, it's very rare that you've got, in effect, the full picture. So in effect, it is a furtherance of the investigation of the original incident to make contact again. Now, part of it is obviously around the welfare of the victim, but part of it is to try and see, is there any other information, is there any other factors then that we need to consider in terms of the investigation or indeed the risk to the individual, and what other further interventions. So I wouldn't want to be thought it's it's in some way a passive procedure. It needs to be quite a proactive, active procedure which seeks to acquire further knowledge, because as I say, there's always more to tell, there's always more to say, and you don't get it all at the first pass, and it can take some time to build up a relationship. But I would point out that certainly in the busier division, certainly within DMR, there's now coordination personnel who make sure then that, in effect, victims who are repeat victims are getting a good quality around, and a relationship builds up, should I say, to make sure that we're getting information quickly, and that we can, with other agencies, then make the necessary interventions. So this is all of this is a risk business, in that you're trying to make an assessment as the risk the victim is in, and we know then that ultimately situations can really escalate very quickly and very tragically, and we have a very sorry record of domestic motivated murders in this country, and so we want to be able actually to prevent those and prevent situations escalate, and support victims through our intervention, but also flag post the intervention of others. So I'd like it to be clear that this isn't just filling a form or a tick box to make a percentage. This should be an active, indeed proactive venture by ourselves.
And that's positive to hear that, Commissioner. I think it speaks to the earlier points in relation to trauma-informed and responsive training, to ensure that there are very dynamic approaches offered to members in the aftermath of very serious situations or incidents. And it's positive to hear that the engagement or the relationship is, supported in that aftermath space. I think it does go back to the training being beyond sessions and sessional in type and nature, that they're very role play, practice led. So I think it would be the position through the community engagement lens that's very much a reinforcement through An Garda Síochána.
Well, might I just say, we're open to any initiatives or ventures in respect of training. But it has to be borne in mind that we have 10,000 uniformed personnel to train, and at times you can, and I have heard very impactful presentations that recovering victims have or survivors have given to conferences or smaller gatherings of people, but we can't expect that to be repeated across the numbers that we have. So you're right, we have to look towards role play, and then the input of, in effect, other professionals to bring their learning to bear as well. So we have to be mindful just the scale of the training that we undertake, together with other responsibilities in respect of training as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. Before I perhaps hand over to my colleagues, my last question maybe promotes or looks at the prevalence of domestic abuse in our communities all over Ireland. And with that in mind, it requires a very nuanced response, representative yet tailored to the needs that exist within community. And, from that point of view, I'm keen to ascertain the approach that An Garda Síochána adopts to victims and potential victims, that respects or takes into consideration background, location, and the nature of where the incident is reported. How is that evolving, and how is that promoted within An Garda Síochána?
Yeah, so it goes back to the training, as you say, and just when you mentioned the role play being an effective method of training. So the training for the foundation training in the college for all of our probationers that come out, that's a BA in applied policing, but there's a complete module within that on domestic and sexual crime investigation. Part of that involves exactly what you say, role plays, it's problem-based learning. So it's a continual providing scenarios, seeing how people can problem solve them themselves, and then obviously supporting them with guidance around our policies, our procedures, and making sure that we're continually embedding that. And then after they come out on their phase 2, when they have an opportunity maybe to attend a domestic violence call and observe it when they're not actually the person that's going to be responsible for that investigation, and then bringing that back to the college on their phase 3, and then reinforcing again further problem-based learning modules continuing there. So there's extensive instruction, if you like, provided while they're in the college, while they're out, and when they go back again. And that's why we want to continue with the continuous professional development then for the people that are already out, that other 10,000 that the Commissioner talked about. And again, how do you adapt then? We know that domestic abuse happens in every community. It's not confined to particular areas of our cities or our rural areas. It's everywhere. It impacts, widely across the spectrum. And also, it's not just the potential victim that might have been a victim of an assault or something else. If there are children involved in the household, then there are other agencies that come into play there. So again, it's making sure that that whole system comes together. And as part of the third strategy, the zero tolerance strategy, government strategy, we're very involved with Kuhn in the implementation of the pillars that relate to Garda Síochána. But again, it's like some other areas that we deal with, some of these complex areas. It's a whole of system approach. It's zero tolerance across society that's required. And again, the message is to any victim that's there, whether they're within our organisation or externally, we're here and we will listen to you. A recent conviction in relation to a very sad domestic homicide that occurred in North Dublin. While we had someone charged and before the courts, the investigation team in that case, they continued with their investigation right up to the trial date. And an upgrade on particular software we had actually demonstrated that that whole incident was recorded on a mobile device, which we were able to show to the court, which resulted in a guilty plea being proffered. So again, it's to reassure people, just because we get someone before the courts, we don't stop. Our teams that are out there are very committed. They're very professional. They will continue to, leave no stone unturned in bringing these perpetrators of such horrific crimes to justice. The case yesterday, another demonstration, very lengthy sentences rightly imposed for horrific abuse on a female in an apartment in Dublin.
And to that point on representation of members of the public, is there any particular engagements that speak to how we engage with communities that perhaps are hard to reach or present with particular vulnerability? We have mentioned today already that role, that interface between the members in regular units and community police and possess. So do you have any comments on that in particular?
Yeah, so I think we spoke about the community safety partnerships earlier, but we do a huge amount of work reaching into communities. We don't expect the communities to come to us. So if you take the North Central, for example, where the local community safety partnership was piloted for a number of years, the amount of community engagement in that area with specific cohorts of different, whether it was nationality or vulnerabilities that were displayed, and huge amount of engagement, cooperation with multiple agencies and with the Garda Síochána in Store Street. I think that's something to be emulated, and I think, I know there was a local community safety partnership pilot in Longford as well. So you have your urban and your rural and a third one. So I think learning from that, it's to bring the whole system around those vulnerable communities, and sometimes communities that aren't so vulnerable, particularly in relation to domestic abuse, because it's not, it's not only confined to those areas, if you like.
Thank you, Emma. Before we leave this topic, Commissioner, you made mention of a report that you have provided to the authority on court orders, and I know that this involved a considerable trawl by your members going through all those court orders. But is there something that could be made, that process made more simple in terms of looking at who those court orders are pertaining to? For example, you know, John Murphy could pertain to many different John Murphys.
Well, there's work ongoing in this area. Firstly, from our own part, we issued new policy guidance at the start of this year around the duty to inform if you're subject to an order. So that, and there seemed to be a lack of clarity in respect of that for the period that we undertook this examination. So that's been resolved. I think then beyond that, then the court orders are issued, as you will know yourselves, do not have a date of birth on them. Now, I think that's a particular stumbling block that we have with the court service around this. But I would say, you know, there are other means maybe here. The air code takes you to a very specific, takes you to a specific address, and I think that would be an important, because it's making sure that we can actually prove the proper service of an order on an individual. And so where we've had prosecutions of breach of orders, and this is not just Garda members, but more generally, often they fail because service cannot be proved to have been completed properly. And so, again, that would be quite a simple fix, and I do think it would make a considerable difference, even before we'd go to the date of birth position. And I know, as a result of the work we've done, we've made that proposal going forward, and we have escalated this scenario as well to the department, because, again, as I say, it looks on the face of it relatively simple thing to do, even just to do the air code.
So in terms of it's very difficult for victims of domestic violence to go into court and to secure a court order. It takes a considerable amount of bravery and courage, and it must be quite frustrating then for members when they go to effect those court orders, that in essence they can be frustrated because of the lack of identifying information on those court orders to the individual concerned.
That's correct, and I think there are other procedural issues that we could undertake which would make the service of those orders more efficient. It would require some legislative change, but I do think there are important things to consider, because every improvement that we make will be a percentage improvement in terms of just the numbers that we're dealing with, and that's significant itself. You know, a simple change could affect hundreds of people in any one year. So I think all of them are worth considering, big or small. But I think what, for our part, practically we can see the issues and have suggestions as to how they might be resolved. Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. And now we move on to the last item on the agenda, and indeed your last engagement with the authority, and it's on your reflections as Garda Commissioner. And as I alluded to at the outset, Commissioner, you have undertaken, I think it is over 200 public engagements and meetings on oversight with police, with the public on policing on the island of Ireland. And so I'd like, as a first question, Commissioner, can you talk to the importance of oversight in policing?
Well, yes, absolutely. So I suppose in some shape or form since 2006 I've been a Chief Officer in Police and then Commissioner here in Garda Síochána. And so I've appeared before the Policing Authority and your predecessor, or the Policing Board and your predecessor then, the Policing Authority. And I think these are the main vehicles by which, one, we're publicly held to account, but secondly then, we're able to explain in more depth and greater consideration some of the more topical issues that arise. And as we all know, the news agenda can move on very quickly, but the practice of being able to explain in more depth here, but also then be shown to be open and transparent in respect of our explanations is very important around public confidence. So I do view this as an exercise in promoting public confidence, hopefully maintaining public confidence in Garda Síochána. But I also, seeing it as an exercise about keeping sharp around what we do. Steel sharpens steel. So, like, if at times it seems that steel is clashing with steel, that's a good thing, because we should be sharp, we should be responsive to what the public's concerns are, and therefore then we should be agile enough then to see what the issues are and to respond then accordingly. So, uncomfortable as at times it can be for any of us in terms of answering questions and having to, listen to some of the feedback, then it all involves an important public purpose. And I don't think we'd be here if it didn't. It's self-evident that it does. And then just the manner in which we engage then makes all the difference as well. I do think there has to be a trust on your part as an authority that when we talk to you that we're being open and accountable, and that you have an implicit trust in what we're saying to you, either in a public conversation or indeed in a private conversation.
And thank you, Commissioner. And perhaps you can talk about challenges for policing in the future. And I know that you have views about how some policing issues are essentially societal issues as well.
Yeah, thank you. So if I just take a moment, just maybe some of the challenges I see as lie ahead, and they're continuing challenges. They're not the challenges that are starting in September 2025. They're continuing challenges. But I think our overall policing mission continues to widen and broaden. The most recent Police and Community Safety and Security Act introduced the concept of community safety to the responsibilities of the Commissioner as well. So that is one instance of this. But as we've referred to here today, we've already touched upon very briefly cybercrime and economic crime. I think cybercrime in particular is an area where we are concerned, because it's very difficult to know what the impact of artificial intelligence will be going forward. And we know artificial intelligence has already been used by criminal gangs to, in effect, then dupe people, deceive people, and work through, either investment frauds or some other fraud. Often these are small scale, but the individuals engaged in this are engaged in a huge apparatus of attempts. And it is our fastest growing area of actual crime, and we have to work through what our response to it is, because there's a huge amount of crime within that, and I don't think any of us now who in any way connected by electronic medium to the internet aren't in a position where we're not getting attempts being made either through email or text to dupe us in some way from money. Secondly, then, just now, we spent quite a bit of time around talking about domestic abuse, and our response to that and the complexity of our response is very important. As we promote community safety, I think there is a piece there which is very important about how we work with other statutory agencies, how we work also with the voluntary sector in this area. They have a huge amount of information which can inform us as well in terms of about our resourcing and the priority which we give this. So if you look at Dublin Rape Crisis Annual Report, their figures are way in excess of the actual reports we have, and it probably gives a far greater indication of the prevalence of serious sexual assault in our society. But also then, I am concerned, as a trend, just the continuing rise of violence against women, be it child sexual exploitation, but also then the prevalence of extreme pornography, very violent pornography. There's been a lot of debate about this recently, about what's actually accessible to children on the internet. But there's a huge amount of violence directed towards women on the internet, through the medium of pornography. And that does have an impact on attitudes. It normalises very violent sexual conduct. We've had to bring non-fatal strangulation onto the statute book. I think we've had some 60-odd prosecutions, and Women's Aid recently issued a report highlighting their research into the impact of extreme pornography on violence against women in a practical basis. So it's very, and the forces that are arranged against us are nearly financial forces. There's huge amounts of money is made from this. It's not, you know, it's just not some, you know, corner that's engaged in this. This is creating billions of revenue through the internet, and yet it's creating a very, very corrupted influence on young people, both men and women, who view this.
And in your 7 years, Commissioner, have you noticed a marked increase in some of the matters you've just described there in terms of the depth and severity of domestic violence, of the porn and things like that? Well,
in respect to serious sexual assault, so having 41 years service, I can go back quite a while, but I would say over the last 20 years that you can see that typical, you know, extreme pornographic scenes are being normalised and acted out, and at times then, and this is all about violence, also then inflicted in terms of serious sexual assault. But it's a normalisation of very violent conduct through pornography, which has an impact, practical, actual, real-life impact on behaviours, and through this process of normalisation. And that is a trend. I don't think that trend is set to diminish. And I'm sorry, that's a very, you know, grim picture, vista to outline, but I just see it as the reality of where we are. And there properly should be, I think, and I would say this about some of the other areas, like, you know, a far more concerted public information campaign around some of the dangers and the impact. I would also point to the proliferation of drugs, and a lot of this is seen in terms of the policing response. This is also a real health issue. It's a health issue where we've lots of stuff about the dangers of smoking. There's very little about the dangers of taking illicit drugs in every sense. There's nothing about the societal or ecological or economic impact of the cocaine industry in Colombia. There's no such thing as fair trade cocaine. Cocaine is produced through the subjugation and slavery of people under the threat of extreme violence from gangs. So if you engage in cocaine, then, you know, in part, like, it's hypocritical behaviour if you're in some way socially concerned about anything else. You really don't care for a group of individuals in a different country who find themselves in grim and dire situations. I don't think that's said enough. It's just seen as a victimless crime. It's not a victimless crime. It weighs very heavily on those parts of our society which can least afford to have that impact as well. You know, so like there's very, and there's just seems to be no end to the appetite for illicit drugs here in this country, I regret to say as well. So we have huge amount of seizures. OSC under Angie constantly is making really substantial seizures of drugs, and yet we do not seem to be denting the supply or making much of a dent in the street price either, which gives us an indication then to the available resources that they have. And I suppose there's other areas I could touch upon, road safety and the work we want to take forward around Vision Zero. We'll never get to Vision Zero when we still have this proliferation of people driving under the influence of drink and drugs. There, 25% of our deaths relate to drivers or individuals under the influence of drink or drugs, either, you know, fatally injuring themselves or fatally injuring other road users, and speed as well. And you know, we've started on a program of network of speed cameras, and they do improve driver behaviour. They do reduce speeds. Nearly all of them are showing diminishing returns in terms of the detections, but that's a good thing. because they've brought speeds down to the proper limits in those areas. But what I'd point to is this is the Community Safety Authority as well. Like, a lot of this is about partnership around engagement and education, working towards prevention. And part of the original sort of future, the Commission on Future Policing in Ireland was all about then widening the response to some of these issues, widening the societal response. And I think, with the recent act, we're getting to that point. Thank you.
And when you say widening the response, Commissioner, and you mentioned societal issues, I mean, often some of the matters you've described in terms of drugs or domestic violence, the guards are the first port of call and always the last resort for people in those situations. But I think what you're suggesting here is that there are other steps from a societal point of view that needs to be addressed as well, that these are not just policing issues.
Well, yes, and they're not just policing issues. I think perhaps for some of these, say, around domestic abuse, just the actual awareness of it as a real blight in our society isn't sufficiently talked about. And, I would note in our own consultation exercise that we would do to the public, domestic abuse is very rarely mentioned. It's nearly as if it's a taboo subject, and if you have a focus group, perhaps people would be very reticent to bring up the issues of serious sexual assault or domestic abuse, and yet these are with us. So I do think, in part, it's a societal understanding, and then from that, then an engagement about what can be done about it. And in effect, by the time we get involved, we're dealing with symptoms as opposed to what the underlying societal drive was here. So, we've plenty of campaigns around public health, and these are elements of public health as well.
And is there a frustration at times within the service that there's certain types of crimes that can have a quite high profile? I'm thinking organised crime. But, if you look at the number of victims of gangland murders last year, and then you compare that to the number of women who were killed and murdered in their homes, there doesn't seem to be the same focus or attention.
No, there's not. And in part, I think sometimes it's easier to talk about and deal with the gangland issues, and I think more acceptable than to consider, the recent convictions around domestic homicide. Because there's such a, as I say, grim vista when you think of that. In the most recent cases, women in what should have been their safest place, in effect, were murdered by an intimate partner. That's a very sort of sorry, tragic tale in itself, and I'm not sure how newsworthy it is, or how you express that, as opposed to all the machinations of all these various gangs. And in part, I point to ourselves as well. Sometimes it's easier for us to talk about the seizures as to talk about some of the stuff I'm outlining here as well.
Just by brief way of comparison, how many gangland murders were there last year, and how many women were killed by their partners in their homes and so forth?
Yeah, with two murders that we would ascribe to some form of gangland motivation. We had many other incidents, there's no doubt, but they would be completely foreshadowed by the severity of domestic assaults and serious sexual assault and the domestic murders. I think last year we had 12.
Okay. And I'd like, if you could possibly talk a bit about the internal changes that have happened on Garda Síochána, and in terms of your ambitions and the ambitions of the organisation for one organisation. Can you explain what one organisation is? And
well, again, this points to the importance of the new Policing and Community Safety Authority, and maybe also points to some of the issues that are raised in the consultation process as well. You know, for us to succeed into the future, we do have to create one organisation. Garda Síochána needs to be one organisation, not two members and staff. And we need to really think through how we do that. We obviously have to ensure that everyone in the organisation is valued for their contribution. We've almost now 4,000 Garda staff. And really, I think what we should be assessed on, we get assessed on a lot of the inputs. So many, in effect, student Gardaí walk through the gates of Templemore, and I don't know that that's a very good barometer against what actually we should be doing around the outcomes and the outputs of our work. And for that to be maximised, then we want to make sure that all our staff and all our members are fully engaged. I think that speaks to what we talked about around individual performance management, our collective performance management as well. And you've heard today the work that's ongoing in respect of that. But it would just be completely absurd for us not to use those almost 4,000 staff that we have. And that number continues to grow to their full capacity. But the other part about this is just as the mission starts, it continues to broaden out. There are specific skills that we can employ for, and certainly we should do that. Should that be particularly in the areas of cyber and forensic accountancy. But at the end of it all, we're still a policing organisation. The greater number of us will always be Garda members, and Garda members also have a very sort of unique set of attributes in terms of their flexibility of deployment to a wide range of situations. And for instance, you know, the very fast response to the events of Tuesday evening are an example of that. And I can't speak highly enough of the quality of the Garda members that we have as well. But we need to make sure that we move forward as one organisation as envisaged in the Act.
Thank you, Commissioner. And you know, it's not long ago that you had just 3,000 members of Garda staff. So it does appear that it's easy. I hesitate to use the word easy, but it seems to be easier to scale up on the civilian side than in terms of the Garda members coming out of Templemore, and in terms of some of the duties that Garda members don't always need to use their sworn powers for, and that could allow more visibility of guards in our streets by looking at where those staff can be deployed.
Well, there's certainly more to do in that respect, and I know Yvonne is working hard in that area about additional areas which we can consider using Garda staff. I don't use the word civilianisation because that's an odd expression. We are, in effect, all of us civilians. We just happen to be Garda members, but civilians in uniform who've taken up the office. So it is a question then of using the Garda staff to their maximum so that we can maximise the operational impact of the organisation. But Garda staff can have an impact on that operational effectiveness as well, and that's what we certainly, I think, need to do over the next 5 years. Garda staff numbers, in terms of recruitment, there's huge interest in joining in Garda Síochána, and probably just the entry routes aren't as rigorous as joining as a Garda member. In the Garda member side, you know, as you're aware, we've completely reviewed our recruitment processes. That appears to be working well, and then we see then just how many we'll have for the 25th of August. We obviously have a graduation on the 22nd of August, but I would say the immediate to the medium term looks strong for us. And the other thing I would say around policing in all its forms, it's an entirely human endeavour. There's very little of it, I think, will be susceptible to the AI revolution. It does actually require people to engage at a very human level in terms of the service that we provide. So I think against even the situation we had a couple of years ago, and being in competition with the technology firms, I think that'll diminish over time, and we'll be seen as a very credible employer. We do get very good people coming forward. The greater majority of them, well educated, have had good jobs and hold third level degrees. So you are very fortunate with the calibre of people that are seeking to join, and over time then the organisation will continue to grow.
And you mentioned there about not being a competitor with AI and about the nature of policing. Could you talk a little bit about invisible policing in terms of the scale and the types of policing that might not have been there when you started policing, and the public might not always understand that policing is not just the person on the street, but it does involve behind the desk, and what that invisible policing looks like?
Well, a lot of this would lie in Angie's area around organised and serious crime, and these are the people who are dealing with cyber crime, and that can be around child sexual exploitation, but also high-level attempts to defraud people, and that then moves us into economic crime, big growth area for us as well, and we have significant obligations. I think as a national, I think one of the unique characteristics for us is that we're also a national police service, and therefore then have to have an eye to the international. And so we have to manage at a bureau level, at a national bureau level, many of our, not just across the country, but the international relationships as well. And they're very important around dealing with organised crime and big threats as well. And the more we engage, the more we get out of that. Then we move across then to the whole Protective Services Bureau area. So there's a national bureau, but also at a divisional level. So it'll be upwards now, nearly 500 Gardaí right across the country engaged in that. And as you've heard, there's just been a recent review completed. And part of that will be in the examination just of workloads, etc., because there's a huge strain on the members engaged in that, and we want to make sure that they're properly supported. So where I don't want personnel or Garda members is within structures there, and there is part about being lean in, as a management structure, and maximising then our operational numbers, both guard sergeants and inspectors there.
And do you have any concerns, Commissioner, about a sliding loss of trust in Garda Síochána? I know the public attitude survey, there does seem to be a dip in support, or trust rather, in Garda Síochána.
Well, I think that should be of concern to us, because when we look across other forces both in Europe and North America, we can see there's a general slide in trust and confidence in policing services. I think what we need to reinforce is actually our local connection and our responsiveness, and the high standard then that we wish to emulate, or we wish to provide in terms of the service that we provide. So that is of concern, and we have to look to specific pockets where there is concern. We've already talked at length around domestic abuse, but that's an obvious area where half of the victims who've come forward have expressed some level of discontent. So that's a loss of confidence there that we'd want to address, and I think in addressing that, that'll help us overall then.
And looking forward, I know you won't be retiring. You'll be back on the horse, no doubt, in the coming months and years in different capacity. But you spent a lot of time in policing in 2 different jurisdictions. Are there any other challenges that you see that would be of concern to the Irish public?
Obviously, I wear, in effect, the second hat, which is around just the security of the state, and that can't be overlooked either. And I know very rarely talk about it in a public forum, but even just to say that's another area where we have to expend resources. We're required to do so to protect national security. Regrettably, it has to be said, that's another area of growth business for us, and there's been recent announcements around ongoing investment as well. And I think too then, as our society becomes increasingly diverse, we'll have to work all the harder about maintaining relationships over the next 5 to 10 years with communities who might not otherwise have much contact with in Garda Síochána. You highlight that in your own priorities around those groups that mightn't have much confidence or contact with us, and we have an obligation to provide a service to them and to reach out to them.
Thank you, Commissioner. And before I finish up, I'll just see if any of my colleagues have a question for you. I just wish to paraphrase a well-known speech, Commissioner. It's not the critic that counts. It's not the person who points out how those in leadership stumble. The credit belongs to the person who's actually in the arena, the person who strives and who fails, who tries, but that person who puts on the green jersey and gets on with the body of work ahead of them. On behalf of the Authority Commissioner, I wish to thank you for putting on the green jersey over the last 7 years, and wish you and Jane and your family the very best wish in your short-lived retirement, no doubt, as you enjoy a well-earned break after 7 years of public service to the Irish state. So thank you very much.
Thank you. If I may just... It's just a couple of other things I just wanted to say in the public meeting. I just want to take a moment also to remember Garda Colm Horkin and Garda Calvin Flatley. And just to say, remember their families, and also the continued grief that those families suffer. I'd also just want to mention all those serving members and staff who very regrettably and tragically died through various circumstances during my tenure. Some of them were close colleagues, and each of their deaths was obviously a tragedy for their family, friends, and also for Garda Síochána. If I just might mention Justin Kelly, again, I'd like to warmly congratulate Justin on his appointment to Commissioner. I want to wish him every success and good luck in the office of Commissioner. And I know that he wants to just wish to continue all the work around providing a high quality policing service that enjoys strong public confidence, because that's just so important for everyone in Ireland that happens. I want to thank yourselves on the Police and Community Safety Authority and the previous members of the Policing Authority, and also the Garda Inspectorate, and just like for all the support that's been provided during my tenure in the last 7 years. I'm very grateful for that, and at times being the Commissioner can be a difficult role to fulfil, as one would expect, but also at the same time, I'd say it's been a huge privilege, and at times it's great fun as well too, so I've hugely enjoyed it. I'd also just like to thank all the members of the public right across the country, all the Garda members and staff for their just enduring warm welcome and friendliness down through my 7 years here, and I'll be eternally grateful to them, as will Jane as well, for their kindness. So thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And for the last time, Commissioner, thank you.
Right.